I love cartoons about demons and hell and all things esoteric, but in the nuance of Lucifer's character in our various stories, I've seen more and more people not just trying to adopt the idea of Lucifer as some sort of mythological hero, but that God himself is the ultimate villain. So today I want to talk about why that is, using Lucifer from Hazbin Hotel as a basis. In Hazbin Hotel, Lucifer is a fallen angel and the highest ranking being in hell. According to the creators, he can only be smited by a being of higher ranking than him, so another powerful angel. As ruler of hell, he essentially lets the sinners govern themselves and lets the royals govern their own rings, having a very freedom mentality. The sinner population has of course become too big for hell to handle, however, and Lucifer is said to have personally helped arrange the annual extermination, which once a year has Adam come down with his army of exorcists to kill as many sinners as they can. All of this has made Lucifer the antagonist of Hazbin Hotel, with his daughter Charlie trying to create a system that rehabilitates sinners so they can move to heaven and escape the annual purge. But some fans still see Lucifer as a sort of hero in the fanbase. Now, the idea of Lucifer as a sort of misunderstood hero isn't something new, and in fact, some of the ideas are very ancient. However, I think it's important to separate those ancient ideas from the more modern ideas of a noble Lucifer because they mean very different things. Lucifer as a hero was popularized by the 17th century work Paradise Lost by Milton John. This book would depict Lucifer and Satan as a singular entity who was an angel of God that rebels against him. This inspires him to take the form of the serpent in the Garden of Eden and convince Eve to eat from the fruit of forbidden knowledge. It is important to realize that this book was much less about mythological history and more about Milton's own life and how he felt he was being treated like a devil by someone who thought of himself as a higher being. John Milton lived in a time where England was ruled by kings, but people were beginning to turn against them. As part of a civil war, King Charles would be executed, and John Milton would come out as in support of this and the ending of the monarchy entirely, seeing them as people who thought that they had divine rights over the common people. However, the monarchy system quickly returned, and John Milton would actually go into hiding and eventually be arrested for his writings in favor of the execution. He would be released, however, and following this would write Paradise Lost, where the monarchy is symbolized by God, with the monarchy thinking themselves divine and perfect and above all others. Milton thus becomes Lucifer, a divine being of power, but one who cannot actually overcome the monarchy, so he must instead fall to hell and then hatch a scheme to ruin God's plans. This metaphor would have been brewing in Milton's head even before all of this occurred, because he saw the church as similar to the monarchy, disagreeing with a lot of their stances and not seeing them as needing to be in charge of people's lives with issues such as divorce. In his mind, the church was this entity that didn't actually speak for God, but instead held itself up as the Word of God or even above God. Not being evil himself, but instead believing in a more freedom-based moral system, Milton would cast himself in his mind as a Luciferian figure, one whose writings give people knowledge that turn them against the corrupt church. It's important to realize, however, that Milton himself was rather religious and Christian. He just wasn't into the rigid structure of the various systems and how they fought against each other, instead of focusing on obvious common goods for people. Paradise Lost was a deeply personal work about how figures claiming to be godlike are often the most villainous ones of all, but it wasn't commentary on God himself as a villain. In fact, when Paradise Lost does go into commentary on God, it is more to emphasize the heroic nature of Jesus' sacrifice, while also positioning him as a subordinate to God instead of an equal through the Trinity, which was a big debate in his time. These details show that even within the work, Milton wanted to show the positive beliefs about religion, with the negative portrayal of God only being a metaphor for the kings and churches of earth. Despite this, Paradise Lost laid the groundwork for many stories and later TV shows or movies to explore the devil as a flawed but well-meaning character, and a lot of these would draw inspiration not just from Paradise Lost, but the deep mythological history that surrounds Lucifer. Now, in Hazbin Hotel, Lucifer has a lot of serpent and apple imagery, both of these meaning to connect Lucifer with the snake from the Garden of Eden, who tempts Adam and Eve into eating the fruit of forbidden knowledge. While the Bible doesn't call the serpent a devil figure, this was a common association, especially after the release of the New Testament, where Satan is reintroduced as a leader of rebellious angels and called the serpent that deceiveth the world. The name Lucifer itself would not arise until the later Latin translation of the complete Bible in the 4th century. Lucifer was the name of the morning star to the Roman people, and thus would be used in the translation of Isaiah 14, where a king is being described as falling from grace like Hillel ben Shahar. This term was used to refer to Venus as the morning star, as Venus rises above the sun first and disappears just as the sun passes the horizon. This was translated to Lucifer, the term the Romans used for the same star. Lucifer means light bringer, as they saw Venus as bringing the light of the sun up behind it. Now, the spread of Christianity wasn't one overnight and automatic thing. It was a long process that involved people who already had deep understandings of their own mythology. Part of the appeal of Christianity to them was that it did tell a lot of the same stories with different symbols, those symbols generally being more human and less godlike. The reason for this was in ancient times, local deities represented their tribes and cities specifically. The stories of their more local deities, thus, were not stories of any mythological being, but metaphors for the long-term changes and growth of a tribe, and especially its wars with other tribes and other gods. Now, the Bible is a monotheization of many of the popular world myths at the time, and in doing so, it becomes a lot more clear which figures are supposed to represent tribes of people. In the later texts, the tribes are all represented by patriarchs, but in early texts like Genesis, some of these tribes are represented as patriarchs in some stories, but figures like the serpent in the other. Working our way backwards from Noah's Ark, we get the story of the sons of God and Nephilim, though there is not a lot of direct information on them in the Bible. They are elaborated on in the Book of Enoch as being angelic beings who came down to earth to teach humans great knowledge on behalf of God. The sons of God, however, take human wives and teach them forbidden magics they are not ready for, such as the arts that inspired warfare among the humans. Their wives also give birth to those beings called Nephilim, described as giants who were so big they burst out of their mothers' wombs. Now, before this passage in the story of Noah's Ark came a series of stories and genealogies about the line of Cain. Cain is presented in the Bible as the first son of Adam and Eve, but according to the Jewish Kabbalistic text, the Zohar, it is actually the line of fallen angels and Nephilim that we previously discussed. And in fact, some of Cain's descendants are credited with being the givers of knowledge similar to that of the sons of God in the Book of Enoch. Interestingly, the Zohar also claims that Cain is the descendant not of Adam and Eve, but of Eve and the serpent. This text describes him as being ridden by an angel named Samael, not mentioned in the Book of Enoch, but rather this angel represents the entire tribe of angels that were presented in the Book of Enoch as fallen angels, thereby stopping these figures from being a pantheon of figures that could be worshipped. Now, this text is rather recent in that it's from the 12th century AD, but it contains a series of commentaries on Genesis and the rest of the Torah that displays a long oral tradition that has been passed down to not just talk about these texts, but seem to have inspired the texts themselves, as all these different stories of the serpent, Cain, and the sons of God indicate a long-standing history that is being mythologized about an ancient part of humanity's past where one tribe of humans developed warfare technology and used it on the less advanced tribes. Now, there was a lot of understanding that lower deities represented tribes, but the more primeval gods in the different mythologies would still be elevated to a level of worship, sometimes even above the chief creator deity of a religion. With their local deities, it was easy to understand that the gods were metaphors for their own people, but the older generations of gods often represented tribes of people that were long lost to the memories of the peoples that were then making brand new myths about their newer gods. These are the Titans of Greek mythology, or the council that surrounds El in ancient Near Eastern myth. Gods who represented tribes of people who were now long gone and were perhaps even the enemy of their own people in the past. With that in mind, the people of Judea realized that the worship of other gods was a generally dangerous idea, as it allows your culture to become about the worship of an imaginary figure representing another tribe of people, simply because the metaphor for their story is particularly interesting. A lot of Jewish mythic texts use the terminology that other ancient Near Eastern cultures did too, like the Ugarites who worshipped El. El was surrounded by higher deities known collectively as the Elim, or the Council of El. Beneath them were the lower new deities called the B'nai Ilm, or the Sons of the Council of God. Interestingly, the Sons of God from our Bibles and the Book of Enoch both translate from B'nai Elohim, itself being the Hebrew outcome of the B'nai Ilm, mentioned in long-established Ugaritic texts when the people of Israel were just beginning to appear. All of this proves that the fallen angels of these narratives were representatives of tribes that the people of Judea saw as a sort of villain who ruined God's plan for humans to develop more naturally by introducing war and other things that changed the path of human history. In the Zohar, they are not depicted as trying to liberate humanity, but instead they claim to God that humans are so sinful that they are undeserving of the great destiny God has for them. In response to this, God is said to have told the angels that they would sin just as much or more if they were to travel down to earth, something proven by their rebellious acts in the Book of Enoch. Lucifer, as the leader of the fallen angels in modern times, represents this group of beings, and in Jewish thought, there really is no evidence of them ever being the good guys. However, with most of the world's mythologies being about ancient tribes, this line of supposed fallen angels also appears to be more of a hero to other cultures. Across the ocean, the Aztecs worshipped Quetzalcoatl, a serpent deity who supposedly taught them the arts of farming and architecture. Kabbalistically, the serpent, of course, is the father of Cain in the Bible, known for being the first farmer among humans, as well as for building the first city. Now, even in this mindset of the serpent tribe perhaps being a noble figure to other peoples, it doesn't turn the god figure into a villain in these narratives. Instead, the idea that they are the sons of God seems to be rooted in a historical tradition for many tribes of people to present themselves as sons of divine beings. In some cases, this wasn't exclusive, with the metaphor for fallen gods becoming human being representative of all of humanity. However, in early human history, as an advanced tribe was teaching others how to farm and build, and perhaps conquering them with force, their mythology as the sons of God may have been interpreted by some peoples more negatively, seeing them as a specific individual who came from God but has fallen from nobility. This is not a new line of thinking by any means, and in fact, there are Gnostic texts that draw similar parallels. Gnosticism was a school of thought that appears to be rooted in the ancient mystery schools of Greece, Egypt, and beyond, but which became more public when certain writings surfaced following the Christian New Testament, where Jesus was presented a bit differently. Here, Jesus is still the heroic Son of God who comes down to save humans, but he is also equated with the serpent in the Garden of Eden. In this story, the chief deity of the Bible is presented as an ignorantly evil god who captured the light of higher beings in human bodies so that humans could worship and praise him. Jesus was sent in as the son of the first ever god to save humans, so even in these stories, Jesus as a Lucifer-type character doesn't rise above an ultimate evil god, but rather we learn that the God of the Bible is just a lower deity known as the Demiurge who controls the physical world and doesn't realize that there is a more noble and pure deity that exists above him. Now, in the show, it's hard to say how exactly Lucifer will be portrayed. Like most characters, he likely has a very dark side, but he is going to be likable in some way, though that won't exactly make him a misunderstood hero in the grand scheme of the mythology. Regardless of the direction the story goes, I hope people just understand that the show is a story. And while it already has beautiful commentary, Hazbin Hotel has proven that it's more about the nature of humans who enslave each other based off of their vices, as opposed to commentary on the nature of God itself. But how did you feel about today's deep dive? Did you learn anything new about mythological history? Let me know what kind of Helluverse deep dive I should do next, and I'll see you next time.